They say the chances of finding a kidnapped child after 48 hours are slim. After 44 years? It's statistically impossible. It's a fantasy. It's a delusion. But on a Tuesday morning in December, I sat on a park bench and watched the impossible sit down right next to me. She was a stranger to everyone else in that park. To me, she was the 3-year-old girl who vanished from my backyard in 1980. She had a different name. She had a husband, children, and a lifetime of memories that didn't include me. Imagine the agony of sitting inches away from your own heart, wanting to scream, "I'm your grandmother," but having to talk about the weather instead because you're terrified she'll think you're crazy and run away again. I am Betty Wilson. I am 87 years old, and this isn't just a story about a missing child. This is the story of how a lie can steal a lifetime, and how the truth, no matter how buried, always finds a way to claw itself back to the surface. Before I share the moment my life started over, I'd love to know who is sitting with me today. Please, leave a comment below telling me what city or country you are watching from right now. I need you to listen, because if it happened to me, miracles are closer than you think. I was born in Nixa, a small town right next to Springfield, in 1937. My dad, Charles Davis, worked at a lumber mill that was over by the river. My mom, Dorothy, made a living washing other people's clothes. We were 6 siblings and lived in a small wooden house with linoleum floors that my dad had built with his own hands on a small plot of land my grandfather left him. We didn't have much, but we had enough. In the mornings, the smell of freshly baked biscuits mixed with that of the percolator coffee my mom prepared in a pot so old she swore it had belonged to my great-grandmother. Life in those years was simpler, or at least that's how I remember it. On Sundays, we went to service at the First Baptist Church, and afterwards, my dad would buy us ice cream cones at the town square, lime sherbet that left your tongue green and your fingers sticky. My siblings and I would sit on the wrought iron benches that are still there, watching people pass by, listening to the bluegrass band play in the gazebo. Those are memories that shine in my memory like gold coins, little treasures I guard with such care. Because after everything that happened, I need to hold on to the proof that there once were good days, days when the world made sense. I was the second daughter, the one my mom always said was born with a special gift for worrying about others. Since I was little, I spent my time taking care of my younger siblings, making sure everyone had something on their plate, that no one went out without a sweater, even if it was warm. My mom told me I was born to be a mother, and she was right, although in a way neither of us could imagine back then. At 16, I met Harold Wilson at a county fair. He was a tall boy, with light eyes and an easy smile, who worked as a mechanic's assistant at a garage in downtown Springfield. I fell in love with him with that foolish and precious intensity with which you only fall in love when you are 16 and the whole world seems possible. We got married 2 years later, in 1964, in a simple ceremony at the same church where I had been baptized. I wore a white dress that my Aunt Ruth had sewn, and Harold wore a borrowed suit that was a little long in the sleeves. It didn't matter. That day I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. We went to live in a small apartment we rented in the Oak Grove neighborhood in Springfield. It was a small space with a bed, a hot plate, and a shared bathroom down the hall, but it was ours. Harold worked long hours at the garage, and I did seamstress work from home to help with expenses. Every dollar counted, but we were happy with that simple happiness that comes from sharing life with someone you love. Our daughter Linda was born in January 1958, a cold morning when the frost on the windows looked like lace curtains. A cold morning when the sky was so gray it looked like it was going to snow. The birth was at home with a midwife from the neighborhood named Miss Mary. I remember the pain, of course. But more than the pain, I remember the moment I heard her first cry. It was a small sound, but so strong, so full of life, that I felt my heart expand inside my chest until I thought it was going to explode. Harold held her with such care, with such fear of hurting her, that it made me cry. In that moment, I thought there was nothing else I could need in life. I had my husband, I had my daughter, we had health, and we had love. What more could a woman ask for? Linda grew up to be a restless girl, with a loud laugh and a strong character. She had her dad's eyes, and my same habit of worrying about everything. When she was 5, Harold managed to save enough to buy a small lot in the Roundtree neighborhood, also in Springfield. It was a narrow lot, one of those that hardly have any frontage but stretch way back. And there we built our house little by little. First, It was just a framed room with siding that wasn't finished and a tin roof. But every year we added something else. A second room, our own bathroom, a concrete foundation, a kitchen with oak cabinets. The house grew with us as if it were another member of the family. I remember those years with a mixture of fatigue and nostalgia. Harold was still at the garage, but now not just as an assistant, but as a full mechanic. I continued sewing, but I also sold pies on weekends at the farmer's market. Linda went to Sunshine Elementary, which was 6 blocks from the house. Every morning, I braided her hair into 2 tight braids, put on her impeccable uniform, and walked her to the corner. Sometimes I think about those moments, about how, back then, they seemed routine to me, almost boring. I didn't know I was living what I would later remember as the happiest days of my life. The 70 seconds brought changes. Linda became a beautiful young woman, tall and thin, with shiny black hair that reached her waist. She was a good student, responsible, affectionate. At 17, she met Gary, a boy from the neighborhood who worked at a grocery store. He was a good boy, hard-working, respectful. They started dating, with our permission. And although I would have preferred Linda to wait a little longer, to study something, to see more of the world before tying herself to someone, I also understood that love understands neither plans nor timing. They loved each other, and that was what mattered. They got married in March 1976. Linda was barely 18 years old, a child herself playing house, but determined to start her own family. The wedding was simple, in the same style mine had been. A white dress that I sewed myself, spending whole nights at the Singer machine that Harold had given me years ago. A service at the community chapel. A meal at the house with the closest relatives. Pot roast, rice, casseroles, lemonade, country music that the godparents hired as a gift. I watched my daughter dance that day in her white dress, spinning under the string lights we had hung on the patio, and I felt a mixture of happiness and melancholy so strong that I had to hide for a moment in the kitchen to cry without anyone seeing me. They weren't sad tears. Not exactly. They were a mother's tears. The kind you cry when you realize your baby is no longer your baby, that she already has her own life, her own future. Gary and Linda went to live in a duplex they rented 3 blocks from our house. I visited them almost daily, bringing them food, helping Linda with household things. Gary worked long hours at the store, from 7 inches the morning until 8 at night, and Linda had gotten a job at a diner in the neighborhood. Life was hard, but they were young and strong and seemed to handle it well. And then, in October 1976, Linda gave me the news I had been waiting for since her wedding day. She was pregnant. I was going to be a grandmother. I can't describe what I felt in that moment. It was as if all the years of work, of sacrifice, of sleepless nights worrying about the future, suddenly made sense. I was going to be a grandmother. I was going to have a grandson or granddaughter to spoil, to take care of, to give all the love that overflowed from my heart. Harold and I went crazy with joy. We started saving money to buy things for the baby. A wooden crib we found used but in good condition. Blankets that I knitted myself at night. Cloth diapers that I sewed with scraps of soft fabric. Tiny clothes that looked like doll clothes. Every time I folded one of those little garments, I imagined the baby who would wear them, and my heart filled with a joy so big it hurt. Linda's pregnancy was difficult. She had a lot of morning sickness the first few months, and in the last ones, her feet swelled so much she could barely walk. I went to see her every day, made her herbal tea, rubbed her feet, stayed with her when Gary had to work late. I remember one night, when she was 8 months along, she told me she was scared. Scared of the birth, scared of not knowing how to be a mom, scared of not being enough. I grabbed her hands, squeezed them tight, and told her something my mom had told me when I was expecting Linda. I told her that a mother's love isn't learned, that it's born with you the moment your child is born, that it's the oldest and strongest instinct that exists in the world, that she was going to be a wonderful mom because she already loved that baby with all her soul, and that was all that was needed. Grace was born on the 15th of May, 1977, at 3 inches the morning. It was a complicated birth. Linda was in labor for almost 20 hours. I was with her the whole time, holding her hand, wiping the sweat from her forehead, telling her to breathe, that it wouldn't be long, that soon she would have her baby in her arms. When I finally heard Grace's cry, I started crying too. It was a girl, a perfect girl with a head full of black hair and incredibly strong lungs, judging by how she screamed. She weighed 7 pounds, 1 ounce. She was small but strong. The nurse cleaned her, wrapped her in a yellow blanket I had knitted. She passed her to me first before Linda, because my daughter was very tired and needed to be checked over. I held Grace for the first time and felt the world stop. She was so tiny, so fragile, so perfect. She had her little eyes shut tight and her little hands in tight fists. I gave her a kiss on the forehead, on that soft skin that smelled of new life, and whispered a promise to her. I promised her that I would always take care of her, that I would always be there for her, that I would never let anything bad happen to her. It was a promise I made with all my heart, with all my soul. A promise I broke unintentionally 3 years later, on a morning in March that changed everything forever. The first years of Grace's life were the most beautiful I remember. She was a quiet baby, who hardly cried, who slept well, who was always smiling. Linda and Gary continued living nearby, and I saw Grace every day. I took care of her when they worked, which was almost all the time. I loved everything about her. I loved how her little head smelled after bathing her. I loved how she laughed when I tickled her tummy. I loved how she said my name in baby talk, how she hugged me with those chubby little arms, how she looked for me when she entered a room. When she started walking at 11 months, it was like seeing a miracle. Those wobbly little steps, those falls on her bottom that made her laugh instead of cry, that determination with which she got up and tried again. Grace was special. I'm not saying that just because she was my granddaughter. She was special, truly. She had such a big personality in that tiny body. She was curious, brave, affectionate. By 2 years old, she spoke clearly, with complete sentences that surprised everyone. She said things that made you laugh until your stomach hurt. Once, when she was 2.5, we were at the store, and she saw a man with a very long beard. She stared at him, and then asked me with all the seriousness in the world if that man was Santa Claus, but without his uniform. The people around laughed so much that the man himself ended up giving her a candy. She loved animals. Every time she saw a dog or a cat on the street, she ran towards it without fear, wanting to pet it. I was always behind her, making sure she didn't get close to dogs that looked aggressive. But generally, animals loved her. It was as if they knew she was good, that she was pure. She also loved to sing. She sang all day, songs she heard on the radio, songs I taught her, songs she invented herself. She had a tiny voice, but perfectly in tune. Sometimes I sat her on my lap and we sang together. And those moments were so perfect that I closed my eyes and asked God for time to stop there in that instant of pure happiness. By the time Grace turned 3, in May 1980, she was already the absolute center of our lives. Harold adored her. Gary adored her. Linda was a dedicated, hard-working, loving mom. I was a grandmother who couldn't go a day without seeing her granddaughter, without hugging her, without making sure she was okay. We had a small party for her birthday. We bought a chocolate cake at the Sunshine Bakery. Linda made colored jello. I made rice pudding and iced tea and lemonade. We invited the neighbors, the close relatives. Grace wore a pink dress with white ruffles that I had sewn myself. She looked like a princess. I remember she blew out the candles on the cake with a concentration so serious we all laughed. I asked her to make a wish, and she squeezed her little eyes shut tight, clasped her little hands, and then opened her eyes and told me she had asked for a kitten. We all laughed. I promised her I would get her a kitten. I could never keep that promise because 3 months later, on a Friday in March, Friday the 7th of March 1980, Grace disappeared. That morning started like any other. I got up early, as always, when it was still dark outside, and the only sound was the singing of the first birds. Harold was still sleeping. I went to the kitchen, turned on the gas stove, put the kettle on for coffee. While the water heated, I took out the dough I had left prepared the night before and started making biscuits. The ritual was always the same, taking a ball of dough, flattening it, giving it that shape that is only achieved with years of practice, putting it on the hot baking sheet. The smell of the biscuit rising, that unmistakable aroma, was so familiar I could do it with my eyes closed. Harold got up at 6 like every day. He washed his face at the sink, put on his work clothes, sat at the table. I served him coffee with lots of sugar, as he liked it, and fresh biscuits with gravy. He ate quickly. He was always in a hurry to get to the garage. He gave me a kiss on the forehead, said, "See you in the afternoon," and left. I heard the screen door open and close, his steps moving away down the gravel driveway, the silence that remained after he left. At 7:30, Linda arrived with Grace. That day, she had to work the morning shift at the diner from 8 to 2 inches the afternoon, and I always watched Grace when she worked. Gary had already gone to the store since 6:30. Linda looked tired. She had dark circles under her eyes. She told me Grace had slept poorly, that she had woken up several times crying, that she didn't know what was wrong. The girl was quiet, which was rare for her. Normally, when she arrived, she ran towards me shouting, "Grandma, Grandma," with that excitement that melted my heart. But that day she just hugged my legs and stood there quiet. I touched her forehead to see if she had a fever. It was normal. I asked her if anything hurt. She shook her head, saying no. Linda told me she was probably just tired from the bad night, that surely after breakfast she would perk up. I warmed up a little milk for her, gave her a sweet roll I had bought the day before at the bakery. Grace ate slowly without her usual enthusiasm. I sat with her, stroked her hair, sang a song softly. Little by little she started to cheer up. Her sleepy little face transformed into her usual smile. By the time Linda said goodbye and left for work, Grace was already more like herself. The morning went by normally. We played with her dolls. I read her a story I had of Little Red Riding Hood with color illustrations that fascinated her. We sang songs. Mid-morning, around 10, we went out to the backyard so she could get a little sun. I was washing some dishes at the outdoor sink we used for gardening, and she was playing with a red plastic ball she loved. I heard her laughing, humming, talking to herself as children do when they play. The backyard of our house wasn't very big, but it had its space. It was fenced with a picket fence that Harold had put up himself, almost 6 feet high. There was a gate that led to the street, alley, but we always kept it closed with a latch. That day, however, I made a mistake. A small, insignificant mistake that would change everything forever. The gate was closed, but I hadn't slid the latch all the way. It was just the metal loop over the post to keep the gate shut, but any adult could open it easily from the outside. I hadn't latched it because Harold had left quickly, and I thought I would do it later. After finishing washing the dishes, I thought I had time. I thought nothing would happen. I was finishing rinsing the last plate when I heard the sound of the gate opening, that metallic creak so characteristic. My first thought was that Harold had come back early for something he had forgotten. I dried my hands on my apron and turned around, but it wasn't Harold. It was a woman I had never seen before. A woman who was standing in the opening of the gate with the sunlight behind her, making her silhouette look almost like a shadow, and holding her hand was Grace. I froze for a second. My brain tried to process what I was seeing. The woman was young, maybe 25 or 30. She wore a blue dress and her hair tied back in a ponytail. She had a smile on her face, a smile that seemed strange to me, too big, too fixed. Grace was next to her, still, with an expression on her little face I didn't know how to interpret. It wasn't exactly fear, it was more like confusion. I reacted. I dropped the plate I still had in my hands. It broke against the concrete patio with a loud sound that echoed throughout the yard. I ran towards them. I ran faster than I had run in years. My slippers slapped against the wet concrete. My heart beat so hard I could feel it in my ears. I screamed. I screamed at the woman to let go of my granddaughter. What was she doing? Who was she? The woman looked at me. Her smile got bigger, if that was possible. And then she said something I will never forget. She told me with a sweet and calm voice, as if she were talking about the weather. The girl told me she wanted to go with me. It is a sentence that would haunt Betty for the rest of her life, freezing her blood in the warm morning sun. But as she stood there, paralyzed by the stranger's audacity, she didn't know that her race against time was just beginning, and that the finish line was 44 years away. You might wonder why she didn't cry out, why she didn't fight. That's the terrifying thing about evil. It doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like a smiling lady with a soft voice, tricking a pure heart that hasn't learned to fear yet. Innocence was her only crime. I reached them. I tried to grab Grace, but the woman took a step back, pulling the child with her, and left the yard. She went out to the street. I went out behind her, screaming, calling for help. There was a car parked right outside my house, an old brown station wagon. I don't know what make. The woman opened the back door, put Grace inside with a quick movement, and got in herself too. There was someone else in the car, A man in the driver's seat. But I didn't get to see his face. The car took off before I could do anything. I ran after the car. I ran down the dirt road screaming with all the strength in my lungs. I can still taste the dust from that road. It's a bitter, metallic taste that hasn't left my mouth in 44 years. As the taillights of that brown station wagon faded into the distance, I didn't just lose my granddaughter. I lost my dignity, my sanity, and my daughter's trust. I fell to my knees, clawing at the gravel, bargaining with God. "Take me," I screamed. "Take my house, take my sight, take my life, but bring her back." God stayed silent, and in that silence, a seed of madness was planted, the madness that would keep me walking these streets for 4 decades, looking for a ghost. I screamed so much I lost my voice. The car turned the corner and disappeared. I kept running. I ran until my legs couldn't take any more, until I tripped and fell on my knees in the middle of the street. I stayed there on the ground with my knees bleeding, my hands full of dirt, unable to breathe, unable to think, unable to process what had just happened. The neighbors started coming out of their houses. Someone helped me up. Someone took me back to my house. Someone went to tell Linda. Someone went to call the police. Everything happened in a blur of screams and tears and voices talking over other voices. I remember scraps. I remember Linda arriving running with her apron from the diner still on. I remember her face when I told her what had happened. I remember her scream. A scream so full of pain it sounded like she was breaking inside. I remember Gary arriving later, pale as a ghost. I remember police officers in my yard asking questions, taking notes, looking at me with that expression that said what no one dared to say out loud, that we would probably never see Grace again. That night I didn't sleep. None of us slept. We sat in the living room in silence, in shock. Linda cried silently, with tears rolling down her cheeks without making any effort to stop them. Gary had his head in his hands. Harold stared at the wall with empty eyes and I couldn't stop replaying in my mind every second of that morning, looking for the exact moment everything went out of control, blaming myself because it was my fault. If I could trade my life for that 1 second of not sliding the latch, I would have done it 1,000 times over. Regret isn't just a feeling. It's a ghost that sits at the end of your bed and watches you not sleep for 40 years. I was watching Grace. I left the gate unlatched. I wasn't watching her well enough. I lost her. The following days were a nightmare. The police conducted investigations. They came to the house, took photos, asked endless questions. They asked us if we had enemies, if someone had threatened us, if we knew the woman I described. The answer to everything was no. No one had threatened us. We didn't have enemies. I had never seen that woman in my life. The description I gave was vague. Young woman, blue dress, brown hair in a ponytail. It could be anyone. The old brown station wagon didn't help much either. I hadn't looked at the license plates. I hadn't seen the driver. There was nothing concrete to follow. They made flyers with Grace's photo, a photo that Linda had taken just a few weeks before on her birthday. In the photo, Grace smiled with her whole little face, showing those small, even teeth. She wore her pink dress with ruffles. She looked so happy, so alive, so there. We printed hundreds of those flyers, pasted them all over the neighborhood, all over Springfield, in nearby cities. Missing child. Grace Bennett, 3 years old. Missing. The 7th of March, 1980. If anyone has information, please contact. I walked the streets stapling flyers until my fingers bled from the paper. Harold did the same. Linda did the same. Gary did the same. The whole family, all the neighbors, everyone helped. But days passed, and there was no news. 1 week passed, 2 weeks passed, a month passed. The police continued investigating, but it was obvious they had no real leads. They started to suggest delicately that we prepare for the worst. That in cases like this, when a child is taken by strangers, the statistics weren't good. That probably, that maybe, that we didn't want to think about it. But we had to be realistic. I refused to listen. I refused to accept that Grace could be dead. There was no body, no proof. She was alive. She had to be alive. I felt it in my heart, in my bones, in every fiber of my being. My granddaughter was alive somewhere, and I was going to find her. My relationship with Linda changed after that day. She never told me directly, but I knew she blamed me. I blamed myself too, so I couldn't judge her for that. We kept talking. We kept seeing each other, but there was a distance that didn't exist before, a pain so big between us that neither of us knew how to cross. Gary also changed. He became quieter, more distant. Linda's marriage began to crack under the weight of that loss. Grief is a heavy stone, and we were all carrying it differently. Linda couldn't look at me without seeing the woman who left the gate unlatched. I couldn't look at her without seeing the accusation in her eyes, even if she never said the words. Silence can sometimes be louder than a scream, especially when it carries the weight of a lost child between a mother and grandmother. But Betty refused to let this silence become the end of their story. She was about to start a search that would defy all logic and reason. Our house, once filled with the smell of baking biscuits and laughter, became a mausoleum. We moved through the rooms like shadows, afraid to speak, afraid to feel. Because if we let the pain in, we knew it would drown us completely. They divorced 2 years later, in 1982. Linda stayed living with us. Gary went to live with his sister in Street Louis. We saw him occasionally, but the pain of losing Grace was too much for him. He needed to escape, start over in another place where every corner didn't remind him of his daughter. I never stopped searching. Never. During the next 44 years, not a single day passed without me thinking of Grace, without looking for her in some way. At first I searched physically, walking the streets, going to different cities, showing her photo to people. Later, when I was older and my legs couldn't take as much, I kept searching in other ways, looking at every girl I saw on the street, wondering if it would be her, going to the police every month, every year, asking if there was anything new. There was never anything new. The flyers faded with the sun and rain. The ones pasted on the poles fell off or were covered by other ads. But I kept a copy of that flyer in my wallet inside plastic to protect it. I took it everywhere. Sometimes I took it out and looked at that photo. I touched Grace's face with my finger, spoke to her in whispers. I told her I hadn't forgotten her, that I would never forget her, that I was still looking for her, that if she was alive somewhere, I was going to find her or she was going to find me. The years passed in a strange way. On one hand, life continued. We had to work, we had to eat, we had to pay the bills. On the other hand, a part of me had stayed frozen in that morning of March 1980. Harold aged, I aged, Linda aged, the world changed, America changed, everything changed. But Grace, in my mind, remained that 3-year-old little girl with her pink dress, with her smile of small teeth, with her singing voice. Harold died in 2010 of a heart attack. He was 74 years old, until his last day. Every night before sleeping, he asked God to help us find Grace. It was his last hope, his last thought. We buried him in the municipal cemetery. On his tombstone we put, "Loving father, devoted husband, grandfather who never stopped searching." Linda and I were left alone in the house. She never remarried, never had more children. That pain was too great. The possibility of losing another child was unthinkable to her. Over the years, people stopped asking about Grace. The neighbors who knew the story died or moved out of the neighborhood. New neighbors arrived who knew nothing. To the world, Grace was just another statistic. Another missing child in the thousands of cases accumulating in police files. But for me, for Linda, for the few relatives left, Grace was still real. She was still our girl. She was still that hole in our lives that was never filled with anything else. I turned 60, then 70. My hair turned completely white. My back hunched. My hands developed arthritis that hurt especially on cold mornings. But I never stopped going out for walks. Every day, no matter the weather, I walked through the neighborhood, through the same places where I had pasted flyers 40 years ago, through the park where I used to take Grace to play, through the church where I had prayed thousands of rosaries asking for her return. My routine was always the same. Get up early, pray, eat breakfast, walk, return home, do my chores, and always look at the faces of the people I saw on the street. I looked for Grace in every woman in her 40 seconds I saw. I wondered what she would look like now, if she would have children, if she was happy, if she remembered anything about us, if she had ever felt something was missing in her life, if she had tried to look for us as we had looked for her. 1,000 questions without answers that tormented me at night when I couldn't sleep. And then yesterday arrived, Monday, the 2nd of December 2024, a day that started just like all the other days of the last 44 years, but ended in a way that I never, even in my wildest dreams, could have imagined. I got up that Monday at 6 inches the morning. As always, Linda was still sleeping. She is 66 now, her hair graying and her movements slower, but she still works as a secretary at an elementary school, the same job she's had for 20 years. I made coffee, made some eggs, and toast for breakfast. We ate together in silence. It's not an awkward silence. It's the silence of two people who have shared so much pain they no longer need words to understand each other. After breakfast, she went to work, and I washed the dishes, swept the house, fed the stray cat I adopted 5 years ago, and named Buster. At 9 inches the morning, I went out for a walk. The weather was cool, perfect for walking. Springfield in December is nice. The air is clean and the sky is clear. I walked through my neighborhood, greeting the neighbors I know, stopping at Mr. Henderson's store to buy some rolls for dinner. I continued walking towards the neighborhood park, a small park with rusty playground equipment, concrete benches, and some old trees that give good shade. It's the same park where I used to take Grace to play, the same park where she swung on the swings while I pushed her, and she shouted, "Higher, Grandma, higher." I had decided to sit for a while on one of the benches, rest a bit before going home. My knees aren't what they used to be, and I needed a break. I sat on a bench under a large ash tree. I closed my eyes, enjoying the cool wind on my face. I listened to the sounds of the park, children shouting on the playground, dogs barking, the distant noise of cars on the main avenue. They were comforting, familiar sounds. And then I felt someone sit on the other edge of the bench. I opened my eyes and turned to say hello. It was good manners, and that was when my heart stopped, because the woman who had sat next to me was Grace. She was my granddaughter. After 44 years, she was sitting there inches from me. I knew it immediately, with a certainty so absolute I didn't even question myself. I don't know how to explain it. It wasn't just her face. Although her face was incredibly similar to how Linda had been at that age, it was something deeper than that. It was the soul recognizing another soul. It was the connection of blood, of family, of love that had never broken despite the years and the distance. She didn't know me. That was obvious by the way she smiled at me. A polite but distant smile. The smile you give to an elderly stranger in a park. She greeted me with a kind, "Good morning," her voice. My God. Her voice was just like Linda's, the same tone, the same cadence. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I felt my hands starting to tremble. I sat on them so she wouldn't notice. I couldn't scare her. I couldn't do anything rash. I returned the greeting with a voice that surprised me by how normal it sounded when inside I was screaming, crying, jumping with joy and terror at the same time. "Good morning. Nice day for a walk, right?" She nodded. She told me, yes, that she had decided to take a walk before going to work. She worked at an accounting office a few blocks from there. She liked walking in the mornings, clearing her mind, enjoying the December weather before the strong January cold started. We talked, or rather she talked, and I listened, trying to memorize every word, every expression, every little detail. She told me her name was Michelle Smith. She had lived in Springfield for about 10 years, but had grown up in Kentucky. Her parents had already passed away. She had 2 children, a 5-year-old boy and a 2-year-old girl. She was married to a man who worked at a lumber yard. He was an accountant. She liked her job, although sometimes it was stressful. She liked cooking, she liked animals, she liked walking. Every word she said was a piece of a puzzle I was frantically putting together in my mind. Michelle, not Grace. They had raised her with another name. Her parents had passed away. The ones who had stolen her, the ones who had raised her, were gone. She had grown up in Kentucky, far from Missouri, far from us, never knowing there was another family that had searched for her desperately for 44 years, never knowing there was another life waiting for her. I looked at her, really looked at her. I tried to do it without being obvious, without making her feel uncomfortable. She was 47 years old, the same age Grace would be. She had black hair, like Grace when she was a baby. She had dark brown eyes like Linda's. She had a small mole on the right side of her neck, the same mole Grace had when she was a baby. I remembered it perfectly because I used to kiss that mole. I used to tell her it was her special mark, her lucky freckle. I asked her, trying to keep my voice casual, if she was born in Kentucky. She told me yes, according to her birth certificate, but that sometimes she had strange dreams, memories she didn't quite understand, memories of places she didn't know if they were real or invented, of a house with a concrete patio, of homemade biscuits, of a voice singing lullabies. She had talked to therapists about this years ago, when the dreams were more frequent. They had told her they were probably just that, dreams, her mind playing tricks on her, but sometimes she wasn't so sure. My heart broke and rebuilt itself, and broke again while listening to her. She remembered, somewhere deep in her mind, in her soul, she remembered pieces of her life with us. She remembered my singing voice. She remembered the patio of our house. She remembered the biscuits, but she didn't know they were real memories. She thought they were fantasies, inventions of her brain. We talked for an hour, maybe more. I lost track of time. She was easy to talk to. She was kind, open, affectionate. She had that same energy Grace had when she was little, that way of making people feel comfortable. She told me about her children, how her oldest son was in high school and having a hard time deciding what to study, how her daughter was a very smart but shy girl, how sometimes she felt overwhelmed with everything, but at the end of the day she felt lucky to have what she had. And I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to tell her who I was. I wanted to tell her who she really was. I wanted to hug her and never let her go, but I couldn't. Because how do you tell someone their entire life has been a lie? How do you tell a 7-year-old woman with her own children, with her own established life, that she was stolen when she was 3? I held the grenade of truth in my hands, terrified to pull the pin. Was it love to give her back her history, or was it selfish to blow up the peace she had built? That is the burden of the truth. It sets you free, but first, it shatters you. How do you destroy her world like that? Without preparation, without proof, with nothing more than a hunch from an old woman who could be completely wrong? But I wasn't wrong. I knew it. In my soul, in my bones, in every cell of my body, I knew this woman was Grace. She was my granddaughter. The girl I had lost 44 years ago was sitting there next to me, talking to me about her life as if we were two strangers who met in a park. And the pain of that, of being so close and so far at the same time, was almost unbearable. But then I realized something. I realized I was being selfish, thinking only of my pain, of my need to get her back, to shout the truth at her, because she was okay. She wasn't perfectly happy. No one always is. But she was okay. She had a life. She had children she loved. She had a husband. She had a job. She had friends. She had memories of a childhood with the people who raised her, people who maybe had stolen her, but who had also given her a home, food, education, love. Did I have the right to destroy all that just because I needed her to know the truth? I heard myself saying I had to go, that I had to go back home to prepare lunch. She smiled at me. She told me it had been a pleasure talking with me. I told her the same. She stood up, waved goodbye, and started walking towards the park exit. I stayed seated on that bench watching her walk away, feeling my heart go with her. But then she turned around, looked at me, and asked my name. I told her Betty. Although people call me Betsy, she froze. The color drained from her face as if I had slapped her. She stared at me, her breath hitching in her throat. Betsy, she whispered, the name hanging in the air like a question mark. She leaned closer, her eyes searching mine with a desperate intensity. It's funny. No, it's impossible, she stammered, her voice trembling. When I was a little girl, I used to have these vivid dreams. There was a lady who looked exactly like you, and in the dreams, I called her Grandma Betsy. Science will tell you it's impossible for a 3-year-old to remember a name for 4 decades. But I tell you, love leaves an imprint on the soul that no amount of time, distance, or lies can ever erase. My name was written on her heart before she even knew how to spell it. It's a moment that defies science, proving that some bonds are etched deeper than memory. But as the truth begins to unravel in that park, one burning question remains. Is Michelle ready to accept that the parents she loved were actually her kidnappers? My tears came out before I could stop them, hot and fast. I couldn't control myself. She saw me cry and came running over, asking what was wrong, if I was okay. I wiped my tears with the sleeve of my sweater, but I couldn't look away. She stood there in front of me, looking at me with an intensity she hadn't shown before. She looked at me, her head tilted to the side, a gesture so painfully familiar it felt like a punch to the gut. "Do we know each other?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "You've been staring at me as if you've seen a ghost. I gripped the edge of the bench until my knuckles turned white. This was the moment. The precipice. One word could scare her away forever. Not a ghost, I whispered, my voice cracking under the weight of 44 years. A miracle. I reached into my purse, my hands shaking violently, and pulled out the plastic-wrapped flyer I had carried since 1980. The edges were worn, the paper yellowed and fragile. I handed it to her without a word. She took it, confused. I watched her eyes scan the faded photo of the 3-year-old girl in the ruffled pink dress. I watched her breath hitch. I watched her hand fly to her neck, covering the exact spot where that little girl had a mole. "Where did you get this?" she whispered, her face draining of color. She looked at me, then back at the flyer, terror and recognition warring in her eyes. This is me. But this isn't my name. Maybe not the whole truth immediately, but at least a part, at least enough to start. I told her to sit down again. She sat. I took a deep breath and started talking. I told her that 44 years ago, my 3-year-old granddaughter had been taken from my house by a strange woman. I told her we had never found her, that I had searched every day of my life since then. I told her that today, when she sat next to me, I felt in my heart that she was my granddaughter, that I know it sounds crazy, that I know I have no proof, but that I am as sure of this as I am that the sun came up this morning. She looked at me with wide eyes. She said nothing for a long moment. I could see 1,000 emotions crossing her face. Confusion, disbelief, fear, curiosity, hope. Finally, she spoke. She asked me how old my granddaughter was when she disappeared. I told her 3 years old. She asked me what year. I told her in 1980, in March. She stayed silent again. And then she told me something that confirmed what I already knew. She told me her birth certificate says she was born in May, 1977 inches, Kentucky. But that her parents, the ones who raised her, never showed her photos of her as a baby. They told her they had lost them in a flood, and that the few memories she had of her very early childhood didn't match the stories her parents told her. I asked her if she had her birth certificate with her. She said no, but she had it at her house. I asked her, with my heart in my throat, if she would be willing to take a DNA test with me, to clear up doubts, to know for sure. She didn't answer immediately. I could see she was processing, thinking, trying to decide. Finally, she nodded. She told me yes, that she wanted to know the truth, that all her life she had felt something didn't fit, that something was missing, that if there was a possibility, however small, that I was really her grandmother. She wanted to know. And then, in that moment in the park, with the December sun warming us, with children playing around us, not knowing they were witnessing a miracle, she asked me what my granddaughter's name was. I told her Grace, her name was Grace, and she started to cry. She told me her paternal grandmother, her husband's mom, was named Grace, and that when she had her daughter, she had wanted to name her Grace, but her husband said that name seemed old-fashioned. They ended up naming her Mia, but she had insisted that Grace be her middle name, Mia Grace, and she had never understood why she felt that name, Grace, was so important. The air between us felt heavy, charged with a lifetime of missed moments. I watched the realization settle in her eyes, a mixture of terror and wonder. She wasn't just finding a grandmother, she was losing the only history she had ever known. But she didn't run. She stayed. After that conversation in the park, everything moved very fast and very slow at the same time. Michelle, or Grace, or whatever I should call her now, gave me her phone number. I gave her mine. We agreed to meet the next day to go get the DNA test together. She told me she needed time to process all this, to think, to prepare for whatever the result meant. I understood perfectly. I told her to take all the time she needed, that I had waited 44 years. I could wait a little longer. When I got home, Linda was still at work. I sat in the living room, in the same armchair where I had sat that night in March 1980, when the police told us there was little hope of finding Grace. I stayed there in that armchair trembling, not from cold, but from emotion, from fear, from hope, from 1,000 things I couldn't name. When Linda came home an hour later, she found me crying. She got scared. She thought something bad had happened. She thought I was sick, or something had happened with a relative. I told her everything. I told her about the woman in the park, about how I knew immediately it was Grace, about our conversation, about the DNA test we would take the next day. Linda looked at me as if I had gone crazy, and maybe I had a little. Maybe 44 years of pain make you a little crazy, make you see things that aren't there, make you believe in impossible miracles. But I didn't care. I was sure, and I needed Linda to be too. I showed her a photo because it turns out before Michelle left the park, I asked her to take a picture together. I told her it was because I was old and liked having photos of new people I met, just in case my memory failed. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. She accepted. She stood next to me, put her arm around my shoulders, and I took out my cell phone. That cell phone Linda had given me 2 years ago, and that I barely knew how to use. And we took a selfie, a photo where our two faces were seen together. My 7-year-old face full of wrinkles and life, her mature 7-year-old face, still beautiful, still young. I showed the photo to Linda and saw how her face changed. I saw how her eyes filled with tears. I saw how her hand trembled when taking the phone to see the photo closer, because Linda saw it too. She saw what I had seen. She saw her daughter in that face. She saw the same eyes, the same shape of the nose, the same smile. She saw Grace, her baby taken from her when she was 3. Her baby who was now an adult woman with her own children. Her baby who had been alive all this time, living a completely different life just miles away. Linda cried. She cried like I hadn't seen her cry in years. They weren't tears of pain, although there was pain too. They were tears of relief, of hope, of something that resembled happiness, but was also mixed with so much complication it had no name. I told her the next day we would meet Michelle at a private lab to take the test. I asked her if she wanted to come. She said yes, she had to come. She needed to see her with her own eyes. That night neither of us could sleep. We stayed sitting in the living room talking until the sun came up. We talked about Grace, about what she was like when she was 3. We talked about what it had been like for Linda to lose her, how that guilt that never completely left felt, that feeling she had failed as a mother by not being able to protect her daughter. I told her that was ridiculous, that she had no guilt, that the fault was mine for not locking the gate, but she told me the same, that I had no guilt, that the only guilt belonged to the people who had taken her. We talked about what it would be like if it really was her, about how we would tell her, about how she would react, about if she would want to be part of our lives or if she would prefer to continue with the life she knew. We talked about her children, our great-grandchildren, who didn't even know they had another family. We talked about her husband, about how he would handle this information. There were so many unanswered questions that my head was spinning. But amidst all that uncertainty, there was a certainty that kept me anchored. I had found her. After 44 years, I had found her. The next day, Tuesday, December 3, we met Michelle at a clinical lab downtown Springfield. Linda and I arrived first. We were so nervous we arrived half an hour early. We sat in the waiting room on uncomfortable plastic chairs, watching people pass. Nurses in their white uniforms, patients coming in and out. The smell of disinfectant that hospitals and labs always have. The sound of footsteps echoing on the tile floors. Everything felt surreal, as if I were living in a dream. Michelle arrived on time. She came alone. She told me she hadn't told her husband anything yet, that she needed to be sure before doing that she didn't want to create expectations or worries without real proof. I understood perfectly. When she saw Linda, she stopped. The two looked at each other. It was one of the most intense moments I have witnessed in my life. A mother looking at her daughter after 44 years, a daughter looking at who maybe was her mother without knowing for sure. The resemblance between them was undeniable. They had the same height, the same build, the same skin tone, the same expressive eyes. Linda approached her, extended her hand. Michelle took it. They introduced themselves with that strange formality that only exists when two people who should know each other intimately meet as strangers. "Hi, I'm Linda. Hi, I'm Michelle. Nice to meet you. The pleasure is mine." Everything felt artificial, like acting in a play where no one knew their lines well. The DNA test process was fast. They took us to a small room. A lab technician explained the procedure. They would do a buccal swab on the three of us. They would take samples of cells from our cheeks, process them in the lab. The results would be ready in 5 to 7 business days. We could pay extra to have them in 3 days. Linda took out her credit card immediately. She said she would pay whatever was necessary to get the results as soon as possible. The technician did the procedure with each one. It was painless. It was just feeling a swab gently scraping the inside of my cheek. The same with Linda, The same with Michelle. The samples were labeled, documented, stored. They gave us a receipt with a tracking number we would use to check results online. And that was it. After 44 years of searching, of pain, of unanswered questions, everything came down to that. To 3 swabs with cells, a tracking number, waiting 3 days. We left the lab, stood on the sidewalk, the 3 of us together, not knowing very well what to say. Traffic passed by us. People walked hurriedly with their own business, not knowing they were passing by a miracle. Or at least what could be a miracle if the results came out as I expected. Michelle asked us if we wanted to go get some breakfast. She said since we were there, we could take the opportunity to get to know each other better, to talk more. Linda and I accepted immediately. We went to a diner nearby, one of those small, cozy places with wooden tables and plants in the windows. We ordered coffee and pastries and started talking. But this time was different. This time there was a purpose. Linda asked Michelle questions about her life, specific questions about her first memories, about her parents, the ones who raised her, about if she remembered anything from before living in Kentucky, about if she had ever tried to find information about her birth. Michelle told us her story. She told us her parents, the ones she knew as parents, were good people. Her dad was named Carl Smith. He worked as an employee at a gas station. Her mom was named Susan. She was a housewife. She had no siblings. She had grown up in a small town near Lexington. Her parents were older when she was a child, older than her classmates' parents. It had always seemed strange to her, but she never questioned it too much. She told us when she was 25, her dad died of cancer. It was in 2001. In his last days, when he was very sick and medicated with morphine for the pain, he started saying strange things. He spoke of sins, of mistakes, of having to ask for forgiveness. One night, when Michelle was alone with him in the hospital, he took her hand and told her something she had never fully understood. He said, "Forgive us for having brought you like this. We had no other choice. We couldn't have children. You were so beautiful, so perfect. We saw you and knew you had to be ours." It is a confession that chills the blood, a dying man's desperate attempt to clear his conscience without actually facing the consequences. He called it love. But as Michelle sits there connecting the dots, she is realizing that her entire childhood was built on a crime scene. And if you think that's shocking, just wait until the DNA results reveal the final truth. She thought it was delirium, the morphine, the illness talking. She never told her mom about that conversation. Her dad died the next day. Her mom lived 10 more years. She died in 2011 of a stroke. It was sudden. There were no deathbed confessions. There was no opportunity to ask questions Michelle didn't even know she should ask. After her mom's death, when she was cleaning the house to sell it, she found strange things. She found there were no baby photos of her. None. All photos started when she appeared to be 4 or 5 years old. She found old documents, receipts, letters, but nothing explaining those first years. She found her birth certificate, a certificate that said she was born in Kentucky in May 1977. But there was something odd about the paper. It looked too new to be that old. The paper wasn't yellowed as documents from that era should be. The letters looked too sharp. Michelle had taken the certificate to a lawyer back then, asking if it looked legitimate. The lawyer looked at it suspiciously, but told her without doing costly investigations, he couldn't say for sure. He asked her why she questioned it. Michelle didn't know what to answer. She decided to leave it at that, but the questions never went away. You have to remember, back then the world wasn't connected by computers like it is now. Secrets were easier to keep buried in paper files in rural towns. And perhaps, deep down, fear keeps you from asking the questions you know will destroy your whole world. Would you really want to know if your parents were thieves? The dreams continued. Dreams of a different house, with singing voices, with the smell of biscuits, with a concrete patio, with old loving hands holding her. Dreams that felt more like memories. She had told her husband about this, but he always told her she was reading too much into things that probably meant nothing, that everyone has confused childhood memories, that there was no reason to obsess over it. While Michelle spoke, Linda and I looked at each other. Every detail she told us was another piece of the puzzle. Her parents were older, couldn't have children. Her dying father's words, "Forgive us for having brought you like this." The lack of baby photos, the suspicious birth certificate, the persistent dreams. Everything fit with what had happened. A couple desperate to have a child, seeing a beautiful girl playing in a yard, making a terrible decision in a moment of weakness or madness, stealing that child, fleeing to another state, forging a birth certificate, raising her as their own. I told Michelle about the day Grace disappeared, about the woman in the blue dress, about the brown station wagon, about how I had run behind screaming until I lost my voice, about the 44 years of searching, about the yellowing flyers I still kept, about the sleepless nights, about the guilt that had eaten me alive for decades. Michelle cried while listening. She told us she was so sorry, that she couldn't imagine that pain, that she couldn't believe all that was real. Linda told her about how her life had been after losing Grace, about the divorce, about how she could never have more children because the fear was too great, about how every birthday of Grace she sat in church and lit a candle, wondering if her daughter was still alive, if she was okay, if she was happy, about how when she saw girls the age Grace would be, her heart broke again and again. Michelle reached out and took Linda's hand. The two looked at each other with tears rolling down their cheeks, and I knew with every fiber of my being that I was seeing a mother and her daughter recognizing each other despite time, despite distance, despite everything. We spent hours in that diner. We talked so much the waiter had to come several times to ask if we wanted anything else, and we barely paid attention. We ordered more coffee without thinking, without drinking, just to justify we were still occupying the table. Michelle showed us photos of her children on her cell phone, photos of Wyatt, her 5-year-old son, a tall, thin boy with curly hair, photos of Mia Grace, her 2-year-old daughter, a precious girl with braids and a huge smile. When I saw that smile, my heart flipped. It was Grace's same smile, Linda's same smile, our family's smile. We told Michelle that regardless of what the DNA test said, although I already knew what it would say, we wanted to stay in contact with her, that it had made us very happy to meet her, that it had been a blessing to be able to talk to her. Michelle said the same. She said she felt a connection with us she couldn't explain, that she felt comfortable, at home in a way she hadn't felt with anyone else, except her own family. She said she would wait for the results with anxiety, that she would keep us informed, that she would see us soon. We said goodbye outside the diner. This time, there were hugs. I hugged Michelle, my Grace, and felt how she fit perfectly in my arms despite the years. Linda hugged her too, and I could see how she clung to her, how she didn't want to let her go, how she feared if she let go she would disappear again. But eventually we had to let go. Michelle got into her car and left. Linda and I walked towards the bus stop. We didn't speak much on the way home. We were emotionally exhausted, but we were also full of hope. The next 3 days were the longest of my life. Every hour felt like a day. Every day felt like a year. I checked my phone constantly, expecting a message from the lab. I checked the online portal where they were supposed to post the results. Nothing. Just the message. Results in process. Linda was just as anxious. She couldn't concentrate at work. I couldn't concentrate on anything. I cooked without thinking about what I was doing. I cleaned without seeing what I was cleaning. My mind was completely occupied thinking of Grace, of Michelle, of the results that would confirm what I already knew. Michelle sent us messages. Short but meaningful messages. Good morning, how are you? I can't stop thinking about this either. Are the results out yet? Last night I dreamed of you, of a house with a yard, with a concrete bench. Every message was a gift. Every message was one more confirmation that this was real, that she felt it too, that we weren't just two crazy old women seeing things that didn't exist. In those 3 days, Linda and I prepared. We took the old boxes out of the closet where we kept Grace's things. Things we had kept for 44 years without being able to get rid of them. Her pink dress from her 3rd birthday, her baby shoes, photos of her when she was a newborn baby, when she was 1, when she was 2, when she was 3. The only photo we had of her shortly before her disappearance, the photo of the birthday cake we had used on the flyers. We looked at them together, crying, remembering. We also mentally prepared for the possibility that the results were negative. As sure as we were, we knew the possibility existed of being wrong, that it could just be a coincidence, that it could be our desire so great to find her that made us see things that weren't there. We wondered what we would do if that happened, if we could handle the disappointment, if we could move on. But deep down, neither of us really believed the results were going to be negative. We knew, in our hearts, in our souls, we knew. On Friday, December 6, 3 days after taking the test, the email arrived. It was early in the morning, barely 7. I was awake because I hardly slept with the anxiety. My cell phone made that sound it makes when an email arrives. I took it with trembling hands. I saw the sender's name, Center Clinical Labs Subject, DNA Results Case 2847. My heart beat so fast I thought I was going to faint. I opened the email. There was a link to the portal where I could see the results. I clicked. The page loaded slowly, or maybe it just felt slow because every second stretched like an eternity. And there it was, a PDF document. I opened it. I saw numbers, percentages, technical terms I didn't fully understand. But at the end, in big clear letters, was the conclusion. Probability of biological relationship grandmother-granddaughter between Betty Wilson and Michelle Smith. 99.99%. That number, 99.99%, isn't just a statistic. It is the key unlocking a cage Betty has lived in for decades. Yet, as relief floods in, they must now face the heartbreaking reality of exactly how and why Grace was taken in the first place. It was her. It was Grace. After 44 years, I had found her. The tears started falling before I could fully process it. I screamed. I screamed so loud Linda woke up scared, running from her room thinking something bad had happened. I showed her the cell phone. She read it, and then she started crying too. We hugged there in the living room at 7 inches the morning, crying and laughing at the same time, feeling how 44 years of pain began to transform into something else. Not pure happiness, because there was still much pain to process, but into something more hopeful, into something that looked like a future where everything could be okay. I sent a message to Michelle. It just said, "Results are in. Can you come?" She replied immediately. She was awake. She had also been checking the portal all morning. She had already seen the results. She was on her way. She wanted to see us. She needed to see us. She had so many questions. She had so much to process, but she needed to be with us. She arrived an hour later, knocked on the gate, that same gate where she had been taken 44 years ago. I opened, and there she was, my granddaughter, no longer Michelle, no longer the strange woman from the park, my little Grace. She looked different. Her eyes were red from crying. Her face was pale, but when she saw me, she tried to smile. She entered the house, her first time in this house in 44 years. She looked around as if searching for something familiar, and then her eyes stopped at the backyard, on that concrete patio where she had played with her red ball, the same patio from her dreams. She approached the patio, walked slowly, touching the walls, looking at every corner. She stopped at a specific spot near the sink and looked at me. She asked, "Was there a bench here? A small concrete bench?" I told her yes, there had been a bench there, but Harold had removed it years later because it was breaking. She nodded, touched the floor with her foot as if measuring, and then told me, "I played here. I sat on that bench and sang. You listened to me from the kitchen. Sometimes you came and sat with me, and we sang together. It was true. It was exactly what we used to do." How could she remember that after so many years? Memories from before age 3 generally get lost, but there they were in her mind, waiting to be discovered again. Linda came out of the kitchen then. Grace saw her. They looked at each other, and this time there was no formality. This time, Linda walked towards her daughter and hugged her with all the force of 44 years of contained love. Grace hugged her too. The two cried, clinging to each other. A mother and her daughter reunited after so long. It was the most beautiful and painful sight of my life. We got her back, yes, but we couldn't get back the ponytails, the first days of school, or the bedtime stories. We were strangers connected by the deepest love imaginable, trying to build a bridge over a river of lost time. We sat, the three of us, in the living room. I took out the old photos, showed Grace who she had been, showed her photos of her as a baby, photos with her dad, Gary, who never knew this day would come because he died 10 years ago of diabetes, taking his pain and his lost hope with him. Photos with Linda, photos with me, photos in that same patio where she had just been. Grace looked at the photos with wide eyes. She touched the images with her fingers, as if she couldn't believe that baby was her. I told her everything about the day she disappeared, every detail I remembered. The woman in the blue dress, the brown station wagon, how I had run behind screaming, the years of searching, the flyers, the visits to the police, the sleepless nights, the pain that never left. Linda also spoke. She told her about how she had broken after losing her, about the divorce with Gary, about how she could never have more children because the fear was too great, about how every day for 44 years she had wondered if her daughter was alive, if she was okay, if she remembered her. Grace listened, crying, told us how sorry she was, how much it hurt to know everything we had suffered, but also thanked us. She thanked us for never stopping looking for her, for never forgetting her, for keeping her memory alive during all those years. She told us that although she hadn't known this life, although she had lived a completely different life, now she knew she had always been loved, that there had always been people looking for her, and that gave her a peace she didn't know she needed. The days after that meeting were of adjustment. Grace had a lot to process. She had to understand who she really was. She had to reconcile the life she knew with this new truth. She had to decide what to do with this information, how to tell her family, her husband, her children, how to integrate this new reality into her established life. It took her a week before telling her husband. She called me after doing it, crying. She told me her husband had reacted better than she expected. He was surprised, confused, but above all supportive. He told her he would support her in whatever she decided to do, that this didn't change who she was, that she was still the same woman he loved, just that now she knew more about her past, that if she wanted to be part of this newly discovered family, he would be there for her. Telling her children was harder. Wyatt, her 5-year-old son, took the news with the pragmatism typical of a teenager. He asked many questions, wanted to understand the timeline, the details. He got angry with his paternal grandparents, with the people who had raised his mom for doing something so terrible. But he also felt curiosity about us, about this grandmother and great-grandmother he never knew he had. Mia Grace, her 2-year-old daughter, reacted more emotionally. She cried knowing her mom had been stolen as a baby. She cried for the great-grandmother and grandmother who had suffered so much, but also got excited knowing she had more family. She asked when she could meet us. She asked if we were good like her mom. She asked if she could call us grandma and great-grandma too. 2 weeks after the day we saw the results, Grace brought us to meet her children. It was a Sunday afternoon. The 4 of them came. Grace, her husband Jeffrey, Wyatt, and Mia. Linda and I were nervous. We had cleaned the house until it shined. We had cooked enough food to feed an army. Pot roast, rice, green bean casserole, biscuits, lemonade. The same dishes I used to prepare when Grace was a baby. When they arrived, when I saw those children standing at my door, it was hard to breathe because they were my blood. They were my family, great-grandchildren I never thought I would meet. Mia was especially precious with that smile that was exactly the same as Grace's when she was 3. She approached me shyly and asked if she could hug me. Of course, I told her. And when she hugged me, when I felt her little arms around my neck, I felt the circle finally closed. That 44 years of pain finally made sense because they had led to this moment. We ate together, talked, laughed, cried. The children asked 1,000 questions. They wanted to know everything about their mom when she was a baby, about her great-grandfather Harold, about the family they didn't know they had. We showed them the photos, told them the stories. Wyatt found it particularly interesting that his mom had been stolen. He said it sounded like a movie. Mia wanted to know if I could teach her how to make biscuits like the ones we were eating, because according to her, they were the best she had tasted in her life. Jeffrey, Grace's husband, was a quiet and kind man. He thanked us for finding his wife. He told us he had noticed in the last 2 weeks a change in her, that she seemed more at peace somehow, that there was a light in her eyes he hadn't seen before, that knowing the truth about her past, although painful, had liberated her in some way from those questions that had always haunted her. After that day, we established a routine. Grace came to visit us 2 or 3 times a week. Sometimes she brought the kids, sometimes she came alone, sometimes she just spent an hour, sometimes she stayed all day. Little by little, she started telling us more about her life, about what it had been like growing up with Carl and Susan Smith, about how now that she knew the truth she could see all the signs she had ignored, the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered the room, the way her parents were overprotective to the point of being paranoid, the way they never had many family photos, the way they avoided talking about their family history. She told us she had confronted the only relative of the Smiths still alive, an aunt who lived in Lexington. The aunt finally confessed the dark truth. Carl and Susan hadn't just found a child, they had hunted one. Driven by their selfish inability to conceive, they prowled neighborhoods looking for an opportunity, stealing a life to fill the void in their own. They erased her name, erased her history, and built their happiness on the ashes of our destruction. They watched her grow up, laugh, and play, never once caring that a mother in Missouri was slowly dying of a broken heart. They weren't saviors, they were thieves of the worst kind. They stole time, the one thing that can never be returned. It is a devastating revelation that adds a layer of cruelty to an already tragic crime, painting the kidnappers not as rescuers, but as predators. But keep listening, because how Grace chooses to handle this dark truth will show the incredible strength of the family she was stolen from. She told us that Carl had lived with that guilt all his life, and that probably had contributed to his early death, that Susan had never spoken of it. But in her last years, when Alzheimer's started affecting her, sometimes she called Grace by other names, names none recognized, as if in her confused mind she was mixing the daughter she had stolen with some other girl of her imagination. All this was painful, because on one hand, these people had stolen my granddaughter. They had destroyed our lives, caused immeasurable pain. On the other hand, they had taken care of Grace, fed her, clothed her, educated her, loved her in their own way. Without them, we wouldn't know what would have happened to Grace. Statistics for stolen children are not good. Many are sold, abused, killed. Grace had been lucky in that sense. She had fallen with people who, although they had committed a terrible crime, at least had treated her well. It didn't mean I forgave them. I could never forgive what they had done to us, but I could understand they were complex people who had done something terrible, motivated by despair and pain, and I could be grateful that in the midst of all that horror, Grace had survived, had grown up, had had a life. It wasn't the life she should have had. It wasn't the life with us, but it was a life. And now, miraculously, we had the opportunity to be part of the rest of her life. Linda had more difficulties with this than I did. Her anger towards Carl and Susan was fresher, rawer, but with time, especially seeing how Grace spoke of them, how despite everything she knew now she still remembered them with affection, she began to soften. She understood that loving the people who raised her didn't mean Grace loved us less. The human heart is big enough to contain multiple truths, multiple loves, multiple realities. As weeks passed, our relationship with Grace deepened. She started calling me Grandma Betsy, like in her dreams. She started calling Linda Mom, although at first it was hard for her to say that word, because in her mind, Mom had always been Susan. But little by little it felt natural, because Linda was her mom, the woman who had carried her in her womb, had given birth to her, had loved her from the first second of her life. Grace told us her memories of the first 3 years were starting to return more clearly now that she knew they were real. She remembered my singing voice, remembered the smell of biscuits, remembered playing in the yard, remembered feeling safe and loved. These memories she had previously discarded as dreams or fantasies, now she knew were real fragments of her life with us. And having those memories back gave her a sense of wholeness she didn't know she was missing. 3 months have passed since that day in the park. 3 months since I sat on that bench and my granddaughter sat next to me without knowing who I was. 3 months since my world changed in a way I never could have imagined. And in these 3 months, my life has completely transformed. Now I have a bigger family. I have my granddaughter back, or at least I have the adult version of her, which is different, but equally precious. I have 2 great-grandchildren who now come to visit me regularly. Mia Grace has become especially attached to me. She comes after school twice a week, and we sit together to make biscuits. I teach her how my mom taught me, how I taught Linda, how I would have taught Grace if I had had the opportunity. While we make the biscuits, I tell her stories about her mom when she was a baby, about how she was mischievous and full of song and life. Mia listens with an attention that moves me. She tells me she is happy to have me, that she had always felt something was missing in her family, and now she knew what it was. Wyatt is more reserved, as boys his age are, but he has also started to open up. He likes me to tell him stories about Harold, about what his great-grandfather was like. He's fascinated that Harold was a mechanic because he likes cars. I have shown him the few tools of Harold's I still keep, and he has asked if he can keep some. I gave him a set of wrenches Harold used all the time. Wyatt treats them like a treasure. Jeffrey, Grace's husband, has been incredibly understanding with all this. He has integrated us into his family without question. He invites us to family meals, includes us in celebrations. Recently, it was Mia's birthday, and we went to the party. Seeing my great-granddaughter blow out the candles on her cake surrounded by her family with Linda and me there too, was one of the sweetest moments of my life. Grace squeezed my hand during the birthday song and whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for never giving up. Thank you for finding me." Linda is transformed. It's as if she recovered a part of herself that had been lost for 44 years. She smiles more, talks more. She has hope in her eyes I hadn't seen since before Grace disappeared. She and Grace have developed a beautiful relationship. They spend time together, just the two of them, recovering lost years. They go for coffee, go shopping, talk on the phone almost every day. Grace asks for advice about her children, about her marriage, about life in general, and Linda gives it, with the love and wisdom of a mother who finally has the opportunity to be a mother to her adult daughter. Not everything has been easy. There are difficult moments. There are days when Grace feels overwhelmed by all this, days when she misses the simplicity of her life before knowing the truth, days when she feels guilty for loving the people who stole her, days when she is angry with them for what they did, days when she is angry with fate for taking away the first 45 years with her biological family. She is going to therapy processing all this with a professional. She says it helps. She says she is learning to hold multiple truths, that she can love the parents who raised her and also love the family that gave birth to her, that she can be grateful for the life she had and also mourn the life she should have had. There are moments when I also feel overwhelmed. 44 years of pain don't disappear just because the ending is happy. I still cry when I think about all the lost time, all the birthdays I missed, all the stages of her life I didn't witness. Her graduation from elementary, middle, high school, her wedding, the birth of her children. All those important moments where I should have been there and wasn't. Nothing can give them back to me. No miracle can recover those years. But what I can do is be here now. I can be part of the rest of her life. I can be the grandmother to her children. I can make biscuits with Mia and tell her stories. I can listen to Wyatt talk about cars and give him tools that belong to his great-grandfather. I can sit with Grace and drink coffee and listen to her talk about her day. I can see Linda finally at peace with her role as a mother. I can have this, and although it's not enough to erase the past, it's enough to give it meaning. It's enough to make those 44 years of pain worth it. Sometimes I ask myself, why did all this happen? Why did God allow them to take her from me? Why did I have to suffer so much for so long? Why did Grace have to grow up without knowing her true family? I have no answers to those questions. Life is like that sometimes. Terrible things happen to good people without reason, without visible purpose. But I also believe that sometimes, if we are very lucky, those terrible things eventually lead us to moments of grace, to miracles we never saw coming. Because finding Grace after all this time, after everyone told me to forget her, to move on, to accept she was gone forever, finding her alive, healthy, with a beautiful family, with a full life, that is a miracle. There is no other word to describe it. It's a miracle I sat on that bench that specific day. It's a miracle she decided to walk through that park that specific day. It's a miracle. Something in her soul made her sit next to me instead of on any other bench. It's a miracle I had the courage to tell her the truth. It's a miracle she had an open mind to believe me. It's a miracle upon miracle upon miracle. And now, 3 months later, while I sit in my living room writing this with Mia, doing homework at the dining table, and with Grace in the kitchen making coffee, I realize my life finally has the shape it always should have had. It's not perfect. Nothing is. But it is complete in a way it hasn't been in 44 years. The hole in my heart, that hole shaped like Grace, is finally filling. Not completely because nothing can return those lost years, but enough so I can breathe without that constant weight in my chest. Enough so I can look towards the future with something more than pain. If you have walked this long road with me, from that terrible morning in March 1980 to this moment of grace in December 2024, thank you. You are part of my family now. Before you go, I have a small favor to ask. If this story warmed your heart, please leave a like. It helps more than you know. And don't just listen and leave, dear. Please, subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Your words might be the exact comfort someone else scrolling through needs to read today. We are all in this together, so please, share your heart with me below. By sharing this video, You might reach someone who has given up, someone who needs to know that miracles happen, that love is never forgotten, and that family always finds a way back home, even after 44 years. At 87, I've learned one truth. It is never too late. For decades, people told me to move on, to accept grace was gone. But my refusal to forget is exactly what allowed me to recognize her in that park. My love kept her alive in my memory, and that love brought her back. So, to anyone listening, especially those who feel their time has passed, you are never too old for a miracle. You are never too old to find what was lost. I am 87, and I just got my granddaughter back. I just met my great-grandchildren. My life has just begun again. If I can find happiness after walking through hell for 4 decades, believe me, so can you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for loving us. Remember, as long as there is life, there is hope. Love always finds its way back home. Goodbye, and never, ever lose hope.